Yeah, so I mean, I think for me, when I step back and try to get a sense of why people like or dislike the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, the first thing I think about is this last poll that we just put out, which shows that a significant number of Republicans are embracing a fairly wide variety of different conspiracy theories, from the idea that Antifa was involved in the violence at the U.S. Capitol, to deep state, which has been sort of a long-running one during the Trump administration, to QAnon. And we asked this one pretty straight, right? We didn't even mention the word QAnon. We asked, do you think it's accurate that the Trump administration or Trump has been fighting a kind of secret battle against, Hollywood elites and the Democratic Party who are involved in sex trafficking, child sex trafficking? And, close to 1 in 3 Republicans said that's mostly or completely accurate. So, that's really, really fringe. And one of the things that we also found in the poll was that, there's still a large number of Republicans, majority in fact, that don't believe that Biden's win in 2020 was legitimate, that there was extensive voter fraud. And I'm really interested in seeing whether, if Republicans continue down this kind of road and the leadership doesn't try to distance themselves from these beliefs, whether there's an electoral price to pay, whether public opinion catches up with them and says, no, we have a problem with the Republican Party moving in this direction, with kind of tacitly or directly endorsing these ideas. And it's still like the idea that voter fraud, was endemic to 2020 is still really not challenged in large parts of the Republican Party. So again, like I'm really interested to sort of, see whether that is something that the party pays for at some point.
I think, the big trend that we're seeing goes beyond the Democratic and the Republican parties. And, it's been growing for a number of years, a number of people who are identifying themselves as independents, even if they vote for Democrats or Republicans. And there have been a number of stories about the number of people who are deregistering as Republicans after this election. And, also a surprising number of people who are deregistering as Democrats. So people are leaving the two major parties. So the only people who, the favorability number within the parties makes sense because of the number of people who are kind of staying within their party or tend to be favorable towards their party. I think there's a larger sense that people are frustrated. There was another Gallup poll out recently. 62% of people said we need a third party. That's been pretty consistent for a while in the 60 plus range. So I think, we have to Dan's point, certainly the Republican Party is increasingly taken over by really fringe liberal conspiracy elements. And that's a fight within the Republican Party. And that it's incredibly dangerous to have one of the two major parties basically embracing, crazy wackadoodle, out of this world, lies. I don't know how you have a democracy when you have one of the two major parties that just is so, divorced from anything resembling reality.
Yeah, so I think this idea of, affective polarization, there's a lot of research in political science that has shown that that's happening, right? So the Democrats and Republicans increasingly have negative views of the opposing party. And we found in our polls actually that it even increased over the Trump years. So in the last 3 or 4 years, we had a question about whether the Democrats or Republicans, were promoting policies that were not just wrong, but existentially dangerous to the country. And the number of partisans on either side that believe that increased by double digits over the last 3 years. So, the rhetoric and communication has ramped up and ratcheted up. And so, partisans are taking these cues and sort of saying, I can't trust Democrats, I can't trust Republicans. And that, is really problematic when you want to get to policymaking and you actually have problems like COVID that require, both parties to come to the table with, relatively the same set of facts and engage in the kind of messy policymaking process. And so it's really concerning to me to have policymakers engage much more of their resources and focus on communication, particularly demonizing the other side, because it just makes the policymaking process that much more difficult.
I mean, it's not just the policymaking process; it's democracy itself. We have two parties that have very different views of what a fair and legitimate election is, uh, and very different views on who should be able to vote, when, and how. Uh, and democracy depends on having a shared set of fair processes for holding elections, and we are losing that in this country, and that's a very scary and dangerous thing. Now, the two-party system perpetuates that in a number of ways. One is this demonizing of the other, which only works in a two-party system because you can only have the lesser of two evils in a two-party system. There's no phrase lesser of three evils because it just doesn't work when you have multiple candidates. There's a backfire effect. And the parties themselves are still these sort of broad, big tent, heterogeneous coalitions. But the thing that binds them together is that the other side is a threat. So Republican Party, there's not a lot right now that the Republican Party unifies around policy-wise, but there is a shared sense that Democrats are dangerous, extreme, socialist, and that's all of the rhetoric. And you look at the kind of story and journey of somebody like Lindsey Graham, I think perfectly exemplifies this, that, Lindsey Graham in 2016 is talking about Trump is dangerous. He works with McCain. He's sort of a moderate in an earlier era, working on climate change. And over time, Lindsey Graham has radicalized as he's been forced to align himself with more radical folks to his right. And this is a way in which sort of you start off being anti-Trump, and then you become pro-Trump, because when you have binary lines, you're either on our side or you're against us. And that really simplifies and dramatizes the fight in ways that are highly emotional, highly polarizing. And so we get this embrace of the rhetoric that the other side is not just, our political opponent, but an enemy, un-American, dangerous for the country. That is incredibly dangerous. Moreover, because of the two-party system, we have this narrow fight for control over the power in Washington. And so the Republican opposition strategy is to obstruct, describe whatever Democrats are doing as extreme, dangerous, bad for the country, and then, hope that they can just, run on being not the Democratic Party and being the opponent of socialism, regardless of what their policy is. And that is incredibly dangerous. And, I know there might be a lot of folks say, well, haven't we always had a two-party system? So, what's new about this? And what's new is the fact that we have a fully sorted two-party system in which the two parties represent very different geographic and cultural coalitions with no overlap. For most of our history, we had two parties at a national level, but those two parties were really broad overlapping coalitions. You had liberal Republicans and conservative Democrats. In many ways, it was more like a four-party system. And as the parties have sorted, we now have a genuine two-party system. And I don't see any way to unsort the party. It's sort of like you can't unstir the jam out of your oatmeal. You just have to kind of divide it up into different parts. And so the solution, as I see it, is to break up the parties and to put in place voting systems that allow for more parties to form. There are plenty of moderate Republicans who don't like what Trump and the QAnon caucus are doing to the party, but they also don't see themselves as Democrats. So we have to find a way for center right to break off. There is probably a 2/3 to 75% pro-democracy supermajority for a lot of a lot of basic voting reform provisions. Certainly, a lot of pretty much everything in HR1 polls at solid supermajority. A basic social welfare state polls as a supermajority, but that supermajority coalition can't form because of the divided nature of our two-party system. In a multi-party system, you can form different flexible coalitions, and there's not the same othering, there's not the same binary lesser of two evils dynamic. So most of the world's democracies are multi-party systems. The only reason we have a two-party system is because we have these antiquated electoral institutions that are nowhere in our constitution and are just sort of a historical accident. So just modernize and update our democracy.